Well, big news coming from the military on this Tuesday as focusing in on Red Hill. Today in a Spotlight Now exclusive, we get an update from those who are in charge of the defueling efforts.
Yeah, the Pentagon making an announcement late today that there will be a new group taking over the closure efforts for Red Hill once the bulk of the defueling is complete. We have the two officers from the Navy joining us, the two men who are in charge of that effort. Join us now for this Spotlight Now exclusive. We begin now.
Ryan Kalei-Suji and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, thanks for tuning in. We're excited about the conversation this morning regarding Red Hill, and we want to engage all of you, our viewers who are watching both on air and online. There are a number of ways in which you can participate in the conversation, of course, by entering your questions on our Facebook platform. We'll try to get to as many as possible, or you can also scan this QR code that is located at the bottom of your screen. We'll be monitoring it throughout the show and getting updates for you about your concerns about the future of Red Hill.
That's right, and we have two very special guests joining us in studio now, familiar faces to our viewers, no doubt. Joining us is Vice Admiral John Wade, Commander of Joint Task Force Red Hill, along with Rear Admiral Stephen Barnett, who is the Commander for Navy Region Hawaii, and who will be heading up this new effort. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today.
Yunji, Ryan, nice to see you in person.
Yeah,
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and what an opportune time for us to be having this conversation. The Pentagon just making that announcement late this morning, and now you're here live. Let's start with a little bit of the background as to how we got to this point in the first place. How are we doing on the defueling?
Yeah, thanks. So defueling is going very, very well in my estimation. We started on the 16th of October. We've been near continuous operations here for about a month. And as of this morning, we have safely removed 92 million gallons, roughly 88% of the fuel. So I'm very, very pleased, but I'm still very focused, hyper-vigilant. We still have to be precise in everything that we're doing, so we're staying focused.
And as we talk about just the overall concerns of how we got here, your involvement, you being tasked with leading this charge, has there been any challenge? What has been maybe the biggest challenge for you in this effort to get to this point? Because by all accounts, you guys are ahead of schedule. Was there things that you were anticipating that maybe didn't happen, or what were some of the challenges that ultimately led to where you guys are at right now?
Well, you're right. We're slightly ahead of schedule, and I'm sure I can talk about that here in a few minutes. But, first of all, to just summarize my mission, I took this mission on a little over a year ago, and that was to safely and expeditiously defuel the Red Hill facility. And, this is a multidimensional, very complex problem set. And so I would say in one word, complexity is probably the most significant thing that has impacted me as we've built this team and then executed the mission. Many reasons for this complexity. First of all, on the defueling side, we have an 80-year-old facility that needed repairs mandated by the state of Hawaii. But knowing the context and the background of what happened, the spills, the investigations, people impacted directly, medically, so that in and of itself makes this challenging. And then we set the conditions for closure and then environmental remediation and, of course, medical. So it's a multidimensional problem set. But the most important thing is removing the fuel from above the aquifer. That's the thing, the North Star for us, so that something like this never happens again.
So given the rate of progress that you laid out, and that is very impressive, we're talking months ahead of schedule by my understanding, when do you think that you will be done with your portion of this mission?
Right. So we were able to accelerate the timeline to start defueling in October. Originally, we were going to start defueling when I took the mission in February or March of 2024. So I'm very proud of the efforts of my team, but this has been a whole of government approach, whole of industry, and, working collaboration with the regulatory agencies, the EPA on the federal level and the Hawaii Department of Health at the state level to ensure that we execute safely and in accordance with federal and state law. But while executing here, we're actually a little ahead of plan in our operations. So, I don't want to yet commit to being done a little earlier, but we're certainly in communications with the EPA and the Department of Health to see if we can perhaps finish gravity defueling before the end of the year. But right now, the plan is to be complete by 19 January. So once gravity defueling is complete, then we'll move to the next phase, which is removing residual fuel.
And if you can talk about that process, the residual fuel, because that has many concern, because I believe the last time we had a conversation, it was yet to be identified how that removal process would go, what it would look like. Has there been progress made on what that will exactly entail and how long that portion will take?
Sure. So let me take a step back. So when we started defueling, there were approximately 104 million gallons in the facility. And so the primary mover to remove the majority of that fuel is using gravity. So just a simple kind of example would be going in front of a water cooler and opening up the valve, and then water would come out into your cup. We're using the same theory and principle, just a lot more complicated with a lot more valves and 3.5 miles of pipeline. But when gravity defueling is complete, there will still be what's called residual fuel in the facility. And that's fuel that will accumulate in low point drains, in bends, or in sags in the pipeline. So I've told you this before. If you go in front of your kitchen sink and then open up the cabinet and look at the catch underneath, there's always liquid in that little bend. So we have to get after that. And the reason why it's taken a little bit of time is because the entire defueling process has been iterative. In other words, we've been applying lessons learned and gradually applying more rigor into each aspect of the plan. So that aspect now has been completed, and just today, the Department of Defense released Supplement 3 to the defueling plan. And in that supplement, it lays out the plan for getting after that residual fuel, and that will take place from January through March of 2024.
And tell us a little bit about the mechanism to actually do that, and how much residual fuel are we talking about?
Sure. So the amount of residual fuel is estimated to be approximately 64,000 gallons. 64,000 gallons that's spread from where the tank gallery is all the way down to Joint Base Pearl Harbor. Again, in low point drains, there's over 100 of them, many bends in the 3 different pipelines, and each pipeline is 3.5 miles long. But what we'll do is we'll go to each low point drain and we'll open the drain. We'll have what's called containment, so we'll have a tub underneath and then a pool around that tub, so you prevent any type of release to the environment. And then you'll collect that fuel and then store it in either drums or in other tanks, and then remove it per environmental laws. Now, it's going to be a methodical, deliberate process. To get that 64,000 gallons, it's going to take about 2 months to get about 94% of it. So we will be able, in that 2-month window, remove 60,000 gallons. The remaining 4,000 gallons, though, is not easily accessible. You have to actually disassemble the pipeline to get after that. And that's going to be a longer process because you have to sequence that activity with the cleaning of the tanks, with the removal of the pipelines, which is all part of closure. So that's why the last remaining 4,000 gallons of residual fuel will be led by this new Navy Closure Task Force that Admiral Barnett will be leading here when we turn over.
So that is some of the big news that came out today about this transition. So maybe the question is, why the need for maybe this transition? You have obviously overseen everything up until this point, so far finding success. But what was the decision made to kind of create this new task force and kind of changing the command structure of who would oversee this?
Right. So that's a fair question. And you have to remember that the Red Hill facility is a Navy facility. Now, I know I'm a naval officer, but I'm serving in a joint billet here. And when the Secretary of Defense made the decision in March of 2022 to defuel and close the facility, because of the complexity that I highlighted at your first question, that he thought it would be more appropriate to put the mission in the operational chain of command. So under U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, and at the time, I was the Director of Operations. So I was selected to lead this team. It was expeditionary in nature. We brought in all services, so Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. We have government civilians, contractors, and the whole purpose was to remove the immediate threat, that which impacted potentially the community, our military families, and the environment. But all along, this closure and environmental remediation, this is going to be a long-term effort. So that's why it'll go back to the Navy, and it'll be a Navy task force. But what's unique and what's different is that, like the JTF, and for me, for singular focus of defueling, this closure task force will be singularly focused on closure to ensure a continuity of mission with respect to safety and with security, and importantly, and equally so, engagement with the community.
Okay. I want to go back to what you were telling us about the residual fuel and that 60,000 gallons that
Right.
you intend to capture. Is that fuel that can then be used for, any kind of a purpose? Will it go into where all of this other fuel has been going, or is this essentially sludge that has to be environmentally managed? Is it different?
No, it's actually usable fuel. A little bit different than the sludge, and we can talk about that. That's a different process. But the removal of the residual fuel will be contracted actions, and we've already done this procedure before. In numerous interviews that I've had with you before, I've highlighted that we went in with the assumption when we were doing repairs that there was fuel in the pipelines, even though we did the unpacking. And we did find pockets of fuel. And so we've used these procedures before. They've been tried. They've been proven successful. But we still need to obtain regulatory approval. And once that fuel is removed safely per regulatory rules, then that contractor then will dispose of that fuel either via environmental methods, or they could sell it to PAR or Environmental Energy Services if they deem appropriate.
Let's dive into that sludge that we spoke of. As you said, it's going to be a little bit more of the challenge, because that seems to have made headlines in the past of one of the areas of concern of just, one, how to get to it, how to remove it, but also what happens to that after. If you can go into detail about that process.
Well, I'll give you a wave top answer, and I think that's more appropriate to turn it over to Admiral Barnett, because that'll be his mission. But essentially, when fuel is sitting in a tank, there's sediment that settles to the bottom. And over time, it becomes a semi-solid, semi-liquid substance that needs to be removed. Now, this isn't unique to Red Hill. Every fuel storage depot, every gas station has sludge in the bottom of their tanks. There's actually rules and regulations of how you remove and how you clean sludge. It's just at a much larger scale in a facility, with each tank being 250 feet tall and 100 feet in diameter. But you're right, it's going to have to be removed methodically, deliberately, safely, per regulatory rules, and it will take a certain amount of time. Again, it needs to be sequenced with all other activities in the facility. So Admiral Barnett could probably talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, please do. We'd love to hear it.
Okay, and regarding the sludge, it'll be about 28,000 gallons of sludge, and that's our initial estimate. I'll tell you that we've removed sludge from the tanks in the past through our clean and inspect and repair program. So a contractor will go inside and they will physically have to remove the sludge with buckets, and then it will be treated like hazmat, taken off island, and taken care of in the appropriate environmental way. So we've done this before, and so we have contractors that will help us through this process.
And if I could just follow up, just so that I'm getting the math right here, we're talking 64,000 gallons of residual fuel. 60,000 of that is taken out. There's
Right.
4,000 remaining.
Right.
What's the 28? Is that part of that 64,000?
No,
That's different.
That's totally different. So that will be, just think in the bottom of the tank. That will just be waiting in the bottom of the tank. So
Okay. Well, let's go to that 4,000 then.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about the mechanism to remove that.
okay, that we will get at that through methods where we have to physically remove those 3 miles of pipe for each line. So we'll go in and we'll have the same methods that the Joint Task Force has used for containment and controlling to make sure we don't have anything leak into the environment. So we'll go in and the contractors will go in, they'll remove the pipes, and we will capture that fuel.
Based on what you've learned so far about this process through the unpacking and through the defueling, as you look forward to this next phase, is there more complexity in it? Because there seems to be just a lot of uncertainty about where the fuel may actually be. And knowing that it may be a little more complex, what steps are being taken to ensure, of course, the safety of the water, the aquifers, and the water supply overall?
So if you, and I know you haven't had a chance to look at the supplement, but in the supplement there's enclosures that highlight where this residual fuel is. We've done surveys through every square foot of the facility with lasers, with top-notch engineers, so we know where this residual fuel is. So, that's one thing. So we have pinpoint precision where, where we're going to have to do these procedures. But you're right. It will take choreography to make sure that we execute safely. But the procedures that we have implemented for defueling will be the same procedures that will be used for removing the residual fuel. So these risk reduction measures have been worked out through collaboration with the DOH, or Department of Health, and the EPA. So like I said, under each valve, we've got containment. We've got all the drains that have been sealed so that if there were to be a spill, that they wouldn't be collected in that drain and then potentially have an avenue to get into the lava rock and then work its way into the aquifer. We have spill kits, we have responders, we also have rovers that are walking through the facility 24/7. We now have those temporary cameras that are scanning and surveilling every square inch of the facility 24/7. So those risk reduction measures will remain in place while we're doing residual fuel, and then as we move to closure for those procedures as well.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more deeply about closure. So Admiral Barnett, when we think about closure, there had been so much talk about what should happen to the facility itself.
Right.
You're talking now about dismantling the pipes, but what about the tanks themselves? There had been discussion of maybe hydropower, or there were all kinds of sort of, imaginations, if you will, about what should happen. Where do we stand on that
Right,
now?
and that's a great question. I'll tell you that the Department of Navy's position is to close in place to prevent any future use for any hazardous material. So that's our desire. Of course, the Department of Health will make that final decision. I will tell you that right now there's a study out. I think it just finished actually yesterday with Nakapuna, that went out and did a talk to the local community just to kind of see what is the community interested in. So that report is actually just posted to their site right now. So that's where we stand right there. Now we'll take that report along with two other reports that are actually out there. The other report is the NDAA, or National Defense Authorization Act, request to see if there's any other non-fuel reuses options within the Department of Defense. And then there is also a University of Hawaii non-fossil fuel study that's out there. Those three reports will be presented to Congress. We're thinking sometime next spring, February or March of next year, and that will inform where we are going to go next with it. But key to it and showing our commitment is removing those pipes out of there. So, and until I took this job, I didn't know that there's a difference between water pipes and fuel pipes. So once we remove those pipes are only made for fuel, so we will remove those pipes.
And just as you mentioned, the community involvement, and as these discussions continue, at what point will the community be updated? How will you communicate with the community about whatever these future plans be it a complete shutdown, a transition into something else? I mean, what are the communication plans in order to continue to keep the community involved in this process?
Yes, sir. The Joint Task Force has done a wonderful job with communicating with the public, and we're going to keep that same thing going. We're going to be having an app. We're going to be out in the community. I'm going to have my own team that's going to be helping us get out there to the neighborhood boards, opportunities like this, whether it's the FTAC, the Fuel Tank Advisory Committee, working with the regulators, getting out and informing. So we will keep that same information going out there, because what I've learned, this is my second time living here, what I've learned is one of the most important things is just to listen. So we're going to listen, and then we're going to also take the opportunity to inform.
And forgive my ignorance, clearly I'm not an engineer. So when we think about closure in place, and we know that these are decaying facilities, right? That these tanks, we don't know how what they will be like when they're fully empty, right? Because you would think that having fuel in there kind of keeps the integrity of the facility itself, right? So is the idea to fill them with a substance, fill them with sand, fill them with water, concrete? We've heard all kinds of different things. What are the options there?
Right now, and of course, this is the engineering study, which is available at our website, but our intent is it's structurally, it can stand with nothing in it, so we don't have to necessarily refill it. That's why our choice is to do the close in place. We don't have to necessarily fill it with any type of material, whether it's water, unless that reuse option comes out. But another thing is just to fill it with a type of fill material. According to the engineers, that there's not enough actual fill on the island to fill all the tanks. So let's just say hypothetically somebody wanted to fill it with sand, and then that creates noise and traffic and things to actually go and fill it. So the best structural option is to just close in place and set the standard so it'll never be used again.
With all this talk of this process, there also is talk of how much is this going to cost, and there no doubt has been some discussion about the impact this has overall caused to the Department of Water and other areas within the county that have been impacted by this. But when you're looking at just this process, how much has the military committed to this funding every procedure that you've spoken about thus far? Because this is a lengthy process, no doubt, with a pretty hefty price tag.
So, we just briefed the congressional delegation yesterday, and you guys covered the blessing that we had just before we started defueling. Senator Hirono was here on island. I've thanked her personally, also with the congressional delegation, because they've given us the resources to set the conditions for defueling and now to prepare the transition to closure and then to execute closure. Over $1 billion have been set aside for this process. For defueling itself, it's a little over $200 million. Thinking through all the repairs, the enhancements, the modifications, then everything we needed to do with all the tankers and the relocation of fuel. I don't know what the closure cost is. I think that's likely an estimate or a range of options, because waiting on those studies and what Congress and the Department of Health will mandate for what the end state will be for the facility, that will then drive whatever those costs are. So it'd be premature to highlight that. But the Secretary of Defense and Congress has committed the resources so that this facility is closed and is never again used to store fuel.
Okay. I want to ask you a little bit about what we know about the spill itself in terms of where that fuel may have migrated. In our conversations with Ernie Lau from the Department of Water Supply before, there's been a lot of talk about these monitoring wells and trying to track where this fuel is. Do we have a sense of where it is and how we might try to access it? Is there any possibility of actually cleaning up what was already spilled?
Right. So that's a fair question. It's beyond the purview of my mission for defueling, but this is a perfect opportunity for Admiral Barnett to take that, since he's got environmental remediation.
What I'll tell you is that closure includes it's more than just the actual cleaning and setting the tanks or shutting the tanks off. One of them is a site assessment. So during that site assessment, we're going to go in there. The engineers are going to go in there along with the environmental individuals. DOH and EPA will be included in that, and they're going to do a site assessment and determine the history of the spills that have happened there, and then that will lead into monitoring and the remediation. So once the tanks are closed, there's going to be a long-term commitment to remediating what's there. But I'm thinking it's supplement number 4, which is one of my supplements, which will be out. So you have defueling supplements, and then you have closure supplements. My supplement, I think, will be number 4 or 5, and that should be released sometime next summer. That will show the engagement plan actually for that, of how we're going to get at that. But there are currently some efforts that are in place right now with ground monitoring wells and things like that. I think we've added 16 ground watering wells. We've got 3 more that we are doing right now, and we have plans for 3 more. So there are plans in place right now for those.
In talking with Ernie Lau from the Department of Water, one of the things that he says is the amount of time that it will take sometimes for us to even know that there's fuel in the water, right? The process of it maybe flowing through the lava rocks into the aquifer, and sometimes it may be there without anyone really knowing about that. And one way that people were alerted about this initial instance was when they began smelling in their own water as it came out of their own pipelines. Is there anything that is being done to educate the public or to provide a resource for those individuals who may think, hey, is my water contaminated, to ensure that there is some level of safety amongst families who maybe are scarred by this and want to take extra precautionary measures to ensure that this doesn't happen again?
Yes, sir. We have a long-term monitoring program that's in place right now. Now, that program was developed by the EPA and the DOH along with the Navy on testing the water throughout the Navy water system. But I will also tell you that we also have an emergency operations center where, and we've, back to the long-term monitoring, we've tested a little bit close to 7,300 samples right now, 7,300 samples right now. And that's a long-term monitoring plan that we will continue to do for the foreseeable future. But if anyone has any concerns about their water, they can contact us at our Emergency Operations Center, and I'll make sure that we get that number out to you. But they can call us, and we'll come out and do a water test for you. We'll send the subject matter experts out to talk to the to our folks that are on our water system, because that's my charge, is to maintain the water standards as directed by the EPA and the Department of Health.
And I want to ask you about this closure timeline. When we think about, you've laid out the gravitational defueling timeline, and that seems like it's moving very quickly. What is the estimate, and I know there's a lot of things that need to happen, and we have to decide what that closure actually looks like, but best case scenario, when is this sort of done?
Okay, so like I said earlier, the remediation, we're going to be here for the entirety for that, okay? So the cleaning the environment and doing those things. But if you look at the actual tank closure in itself, initial estimates are 3 to 3.5 years from the minute or from the day when it's handed over to us. So, of course, we're going to have to take a look at that as we work with the contractors. Maybe we can garner efficiencies much like the Joint Task Force did once they go through their processes to see if, but we have to do it safely and without risk to the folks working in there and to the environment and to the community.
Okay, our conversation continues in just a moment. We're about at the halfway mark, so we're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. You're watching Spotlight Now.
Welcome back to Spotlight Now here on Hawaii News Now as we continue on in our conversation about the defueling of Red Hill with updates that have just come out today about the future and who will ultimately be in charge moving forward. We want to encourage those of you who are watching both on air and online to engage in this conversation. Of course, you can enter your comments into the Facebook comment section of our homepage at Hawaii News Now, or by scanning the QR code at the bottom of your screen to get more information and to get your questions in for our guests today.
Yeah, and we have two very important guests, of course, and it's very interesting because we're talking with Vice Admiral John Wade, who is running the Joint Task Force Red Hill right now, which is responsible for this initial defueling. But then we're also talking to Rear Admiral Stephen Barnett, who is going to be taking over responsibilities for the closure aspect of this. Admiral Wade, I want to walk you back because we are approaching the anniversary of when this all first happened. And when we think back to all that has happened in the time since, if you could just reflect on what this time has been like, what it's been like to be the commander of this mission, and how you personally have been affected by this.
Well, before I talk about myself, I'd like to just talk about the community and our military families. And I get a little emotional here because I was here when we had the spill and the water crisis. I had men and women who worked for me who were impacted. Either they got sick or some of their family members did. I had men and women that were uprooted during the holidays and had to move into hotels. And at the time, I was the director of joint operations at U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. And we live in a dangerous and a complex world, and the world didn't stop. And so I saw firsthand the impacts that the spill and the water crisis had on individuals. For me personally, I was on the water distribution system, and my wife and I, and we have a little dog, we drank from the water for almost a week before we got the emergency order to stop. So while we were not impacted, we did not get sick, we are concerned about our long-term health. So I feel like I understand what the community and our military families went through and are going through currently. And quite honestly, it drives me as I lead this team each and every day. And as I reflect about the 2-year mark, which is coming up here in just about a week, I view things through an empathetic and compassionate eye, and that's why my team and I are so hyper-vigilant and focused to do this right, to remove this fuel so that it doesn't become a threat and a potential spill again, and to set the conditions for closure, because I think that's so critically important so that this facility is never used to hold fuel again.
And Admiral Barnett, if you can also explain your history, because you were involved in some degree when all of this happened. What were some of the lessons learned during your time under command? And as you transition into this new phase, what are some of the things that you're looking to use from what you've learned in the past?
Thank you. This is my second tour being on this beautiful island. And during the crisis, I was actually in San Diego, California. And so what I did was, from my command position there, I actually sent folks over to actually help, whether it was folks, environmentalists, people to be involved in the process to help address the issues and the concern. So it was kind of unique when I was able to come here, because when a friend needs help, you send help. So what I liked about that was I knew the lay of the land, I knew the people, and I knew what needed to be done. One of the first things that I noticed when I got here, and I've noticed a lot with Admiral Wade and his team, is how important engagement and being in the community is. It's going out, it's listening, it's meeting people where they are and talking to them and listening. My first week here as commander of Navy Region Hawaii, I was actually in a convention downtown. And I'd just gotten here, still had boxes packed at the house, and I was right downtown in a convention, and I listened and I learned. And then I came back, and that was about the time Admiral Wade showed up, so I'm glad to be part of his team, but I really learned a lot. And that's one thing I want to stress for the Closure Task Force. It's going to be consistency in the transition over. They've done a lot of great things, processes, policies, procedures. I'm going to bring all those over so we can keep this moving. We've got to keep our eye on the prize.
Yeah, that engagement is so critical. You know, if we think back, it is almost 2 years. Hard to believe. Admiral Wade, tell us a little bit about rebuilding that trust, because there is, of course, the practical duty of getting the fuel out, but then there is, this other piece where the military is a big part of the community here in Hawaii, and there really was, for a lot of folks felt betrayed by this incident, and that the water supply was not being cared for and not prioritized in the way that it should be. How has that rebuilding of trust gone, in your estimation?
Well, to certainly know if there's been any progress in rebuilding trust, I'd ask you to just ask the public, because it's not for me to guess, or it just wouldn't be fair. But what I tell you is that I've been in the service now for over 34 years, and I learned a long time ago that it takes a long time to earn trust, and it can be lost almost overnight. And taking this mission on and doing the self-study and just jumping in, that has been reinforced in magnitudes. And so what my goal has been, in good faith, is to engage with the public and our military families. And I've said this before, but those discussions, not only communicating what we're doing and why, but to also listen. And some of what we've heard has been difficult to hear, but not unexpected. I mean, water is something that, water is life. And, the anger, the frustration, the disappointment in our military that allowed this to happen. So if I look at through the problem set through the community and military families' eyes, it's completely understandable. So what I've committed to the community is while I can't change the past, I can commit my team and I to, no kidding, look at what the lessons were learned, and then have the humility to admit that mistakes were made, and then to make changes as we move forward. And so that's why everything that we've done on the engineering and technical side of this mission has been to reduce risk to the greatest extent possible, to be exacting in all that we do with our procedures, with our supervision, with our training, sets and reps, repeat, so we have the confidence and competence to execute safely. And then while doing that, also being prepared in the unlikely event that we do have an incident, a spill or a fire, and that we're ready to go in coordination with state, city, county officials, and then in true partnership with the regulatory agencies. So for rebuilding trust, it's actions, and I hope at the end of the day that the community sees that what we have attempted to do and what we are doing is exactly what I said we would do, and that is my commitment. And then it's up to the community, our military families, to make that determination if they see that we've done what we said we were going to do.
There no doubt is still some concern in the community about this process. And as this announcement was made today about the future and who would be in charge, our very own Mahealani Richardson from Hawaii News Now has been following this story since it broke and has been talking with families. She spoke to the Sierra Club today about just this transition of power, transition of duties, I should say. And, the Sierra Club, and I'm reading from a message, was, saying that they understand that the consequences of the current contamination are already bad enough, and there cannot be any more failures with this sludge removal. She also spoke to some families who said, as long as there is any fuel or sludge in Red Hill, Oahu is still at risk. Knowing that there are concerns from organizations and community activation groups like the Sierra Club, hearing from families who are still saying that Oahu is still at risk because of this process, Admiral Burnett, as you move into this role, what are some of the steps that you want to take to ensure the safety of the community and that their concerns continue to be heard?
Thank you. And they're exactly right. That remains a hazard. And safe, planned, and engaged. We're going to do it safely. Like I said, I've been part of the process with Admiral Wade here at some capacity through his whole tenure here. In addition to being neighbors, and working together on this process. So I've been there and I've seen what he's done. I've seen what his team has done. I think the key point is the policies and the procedures and the things that they're doing that have worked well. We've been right there beside him. So I'm looking forward to bringing those processes over to the Navy Closure Task Force. We're going to be about 200 strong, and towards the end of the actual once the defueling is complete, some of those experts are going to come over and join our team too. So we're going to keep those resident experts on island working the process. But I do understand everyone's concerns, and it is, but I've got a good team. I've had a good teammate here, and we're looking forward, as Admiral Way says, this team of teams.
And if I could just, I echo what Admiral Barnett said. There is still concern from the community, and rightly so. But my commitment, in addition to the safe defueling, is to ensure a proper handoff and a deliberate transition to ensure continuity of operations for everything that we've implemented for safety, for security, and then also to ensure that the continued engagement with the community to explain what we're doing and why, and active listening continues.
Tell us a little bit about your team. He mentioned he's got a team of 200 that will be handling this closure process. Tell us a little bit about your team and, the kind of challenges that you've encountered through this process, because we hear that, things are going well, but I would imagine that there's a lot going on, anything unexpected, or what have been the major challenges through this process?
I'm really proud of my team. And I wish that the Joint Task Force, never had to be established. So I do want to make sure that the community doesn't read into this that I'm just, talking up my team. But, I'm really proud of them because a lot of them are volunteers that want to contribute in a meaningful way to the community and to the environment. Just this holiday weekend, we were still defueling. We had men and women 24/7 walking the entire facility, looking at every square inch of the pipeline and every pipe to ensure that the integrity was sound and we didn't have any leaks or weeps. We've had to buy new boots for everybody. I'm concerned about heat stress and, just their health and well-being. Safety is paramount. But, they're just committed to this mission because it's the right thing to do. Now, you asked, how are things going? Well, I couldn't be more pleased with the defueling effort so far. One, the performance of the team, but also the material readiness condition of the facility. We've had no injuries during this defueling effort. Most importantly, we've had no spills, no fires, and we've also had no incidents that in any way jeopardized the health of my team, the community, or impacted the environment or the aquifer. In the 1 month of defueling, we've only had 2 minor issues. We had 2 minor leaks, 3 gallons total, not 1 drop got into the environment. The first was on the 16th of October when we were pressurizing the system to start our defueling. We were doing our startups, and we had a valve in what's called the underground pump house on Joint Base Pearl Harbor that sprung a little leak. My team identified it immediately, did their immediate controlling actions, isolated the valve, and like I told you, we had tubs and then pools under each valve. All that fuel, 1 gallon, was collected. Then we corrected the issue, and then we got permission from the DOH and the EPA to allow us to continue. And then the second incident was a small leak from a valve just outside the underground pump house on the 26th of October. Same thing. Immediately identified it, collected all the fuel, made immediate repairs, and then obtained regulatory approval to continue. And they were on site observing, and these are the things that we practiced and rehearsed with the Department of Health and the EPA and all the state and local officials as well. So performance-wise, going very well, but we still have more to do. There's still over 10 million gallons that we must remove from the tanks and the pipelines, and we've got to be absolutely deliberate and methodical to the very, very end.
I want to ask a little bit more about something that we briefly touched upon, and that was just the testing that continues to go on to ensure the quality of the water that's currently in the aquifers and to monitor what those levels may be like. How often are you folks getting results or getting these samples, and how long does it take after extraction before you actually get some of those results to make a determination if the water is safe?
Right. So when we pull the samples through the long-term monitoring process, those samples have to actually go back to the mainland. So those samples can take anywhere from 7 to 10 working days, depending on how long that goes. Now that is a EPA and a DOH approved, EPA approved facility back on the mainland where those go back to. Now so that's the first thing. What I will also tell you is that we sample at the homes. So like if someone has a question, we also sample at the water source. So our only source right now for our water system is from the Waiava shaft, and we test that monthly. and we report those. Those are on our website, and folks can see those. Now, as far as for family members and folks like that, I think in September we had maybe one person that wanted to have a test at their home, and we went there for that, and that water met standards, met the drinking water standards from the regulators. In October, which is when we started the actual defueling, as we expected, there was an increase of calls. We had 21 folks wanting us to sample their water. We sampled 19. All those samples came back and met the regulator-approved water standards. The other 2 folks were still kind of playing phone tag and reaching out to them. We don't know, maybe they may be on vacation or something like that, but we are trying to locate those 2. And for the month of, it's November now, so for the month of November, we've had about 9 requests. One of those test results have already came back. The other 8, and that came back is safe, meeting the water standards. The other 8, we're in the process of working out a testing time.
Tell us a little bit about the integration with the state. I'm curious to know about your relationship. Ernie Lau, of course, is the face of the Board of Water Supply, but interested to know about your relationship with his agency and also with the governor. I know that you speak regularly. If you could tell us about, how that communication is going and what their role is in this process as well.
Sure. So I talk about team of teams quite a bit, and that's because it is a team of teams that are working through this problem set. I and my boss, Admiral Aquilino, brief the governor frequently, and rightly so, as he's got the whole state as constituents. But Mr. Lau, I have regular contact with as well. I asked him when I took this mission on to be part of our Defueling Information Sharing Forum. He is respected in the community, but he also understands the concerns of the community. He's also a water purveyor. So I thought there would be none better to bring on to this Defueling Sharing Forum, along with many other community members and elected officials and functional, technical, and cultural experts. One of the things that he asked was for more transparent but more frequent communication. So Admiral Barnett and I and Admiral Killian, who's the Naval Facilities Engineering commander, we committed to meet with Mr. Lau every 2 months or less, and we go to his headquarters or he comes to us. I frequently speak with him just to keep him informed, and I think it's a robust relationship there. I think you'd have to ask him, but I do believe that the information flow between both organizations is solid and getting better. But you asked also about the state and city and county officials. That's been something that I wanted to work on as soon as I took the job. It's important to communicate, but also if there were an emergency, like I highlighted, there has to be coordination, collaboration already done, already trained to, not meeting those senior leaders for the first time. So with HIEMA and the Department of Emergency Management, working with them, and this is where Admiral Barnett is highlighted, even though he's the region commander, he is supporting to me during defueling. So he owns Fed Fire. He has the response team that's supporting to me. So everyone's working together here. And, I talked about my team. I want to give a shout out to Fed Fire. Many are from Hawaii, but we have 24/7 presence at the facility. So we have an immediate response time. They too are just performing just spectacularly in executing this mission.
As we talk about all the elements that are involved, as you talk about the personnel and the different tasks and specialties that everyone really needs to sort of master through this process, I'm wondering how much of it is actually internal with military members who have been trained for these types of situations, and how much are required specialists where the military is using specialized contractors who maybe have a little bit more experience? I mean, how do you find that balance between determining if this is something the military can take on in our own in-house, or when we need to bring in someone else who may have more experience, especially as you head into this next phase?
Right. So for the repair effort, the repairs, the enhancements and modifications that we did per the state of Hawaii emergency order, that was largely contracted work. So the actual work itself was done by companies either from Hawaii or from the mainland. But the supervision, the oversight, the actual contracting itself was done by either military or government civilian. For the defueling effort, a little bit different. My fuels team is actually military and government civilian. But we consulted with the fuel industry, with the safety industry, with the environmental industry, to get best practices, because nothing like this has ever been done before. There was no playbook for JTF Red Hill to just come in here, establish the team, and to defuel. We had to build a plan. So we built it with experts in all these different fields. And then once we built the plan in coordination with the Department of Health and the EPA, then that's when we did our training. And we used those consultants from those industries to help us, to grade us, and then to practice, rehearse, and to ensure that we were ready to go.
And for viewers just tuning in, we're getting some questions on Facebook just so that folks are familiar with what we're talking about today. The Pentagon did announce earlier today that they will be standing up a new task force which will be handling the closure of the Red Hill facility once the bulk of the defueling is finished, which sounds like it's going to happen pretty soon. I want to go back to this closure piece, and I know that there's still a lot being worked out, but the sort of, given the scale of these tanks, when we think about the kind of condition that they need to be in, are we talking about thoroughly cleaning them on the inside? And how would that actually be done, just given the size and scope of these?
Right. That's another great question. The tanks are going to have to be cleaned to a standard set by the Department of Health. And we've currently, of the tanks, four of the tanks right now have actually been cleaned and haven't been fuel hasn't been put back into them. So there's a process. It's called clean, inspect, and repair. So pretty much they go in there and just think of pressure washing many, many acres of steel. And that's what it's going to have to be. And it's like Admiral Wade said, when you go inside the tanks and see how big they really are, it's really daunting. But it's a process that we can do. It will be contractor supported. And we'll just have to go in there and use some good old elbow grease and just start cleaning and cleaning and cleaning.
And so when it gets to that point, I mean, these are actually going to be people within the tank. I mean, if you're talking about scrubbing, I mean, what sort of safety conditions are placed for those individuals? Because I imagine that is something that could also be harmful for them.
Right. We will have a safety directorate that will be part of this process that will go through. We will take some of the same standards that the Joint Task Force used, and we will work with with the regulators on that. They're going to help drive that process because safety is important, particularly when you get inside those tanks.
And once that process is finished, I know we're going way out now. We're talking about 3-4 years from now, really. Right. Beyond that, who will manage this? This falls then to Navy Command here in Hawaii. Long term, of course, the facility is closed down, but at some, people still need to be tracking the integrity and what have you.
Right. Then that would still fall under the Navy. So that, and that's still the process. If you look at my command structure, it's made just like the admirals here. It's functionally developed. So once the closure is complete, then I will retain a portion that will handle that remediation and those things, so that will still fall under us. So there will always be someone here to keep that going, to make sure that we take care of the business that we should be taking care of.
Well, I was just going to say, this is there's a synergy here with Admiral Barnett being the Navy Region Commander and the Closure Task Force, because those longer term aspects that you talked about, the safety and security of the facility after it's been cleaned and decommissioned, whatever the repurpose is, that will fall under the Navy region. So having that dual purpose there really creates and optimizes everything and reduces the possibility of blind spots and stovepipes and potential that could lead to more risk and a mishap. So I think this is an important piece of the transition that's reflected in Supplement 3 that was released today.
We are almost out of time, just a few minutes left, but before we let you go, wanted to just allow you just a final word to those who are watching and those who continue to have concerns, as we talked about in the community, about just the remaining process. Yes, you guys have expedited this and have done things ahead of schedule, and so far everything has really, knock on wood, continued to remain its integrity. But your message for the community as you continue to move forward and in this transition?
So my message to the community is thank you. I want to thank the community for, before this mission, for their feedback. Honestly, the critical feedback that was given to us made us look at everything twice, double check, triple check. It honestly made us safer. It also forced us to have a better understanding of the criticality of this mission. So for that, I'm grateful. I'm also grateful because so many community members, so many military families have passed on their support and their prayers for my team so that we could execute this safely. And for that, I'm grateful. And for those, the critics and those that have been critical up to this point, I respect everything that they've said and will continue to say. I understand their concerns, and all I can say is that my team and I understand the enormity of this mission, and we're working our you-know-what off to just get it right.
And Admiral Barnett, same question.
Well, it's hard to follow that, but what I want to tell you is that it's my moral obligation and ethical duty to do this right. My command philosophy, my number one command philosophy, only got 3 items on it, is do the right thing. And what I will tell you is that this task force, the Navy Closure Task Force, will do the right thing.
Okay, well, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for watching. We're going to take a quick break. You're watching Spotlight Now.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, timely interview today, getting an update on Red Hill as we talk about this transition that was announced by the Pentagon about the future of Red Hill and who's in charge. You heard from both individuals there and their confidence about this transition of obligation and responsibility.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear. Basically, the Joint Task Force, as it stands now under Admiral Wade, still responsible for taking care of the lion's share of that defueling, and that defueling process sounds like it's going quite well. He did highlight 2 incidents that happened with relatively minor leaks when you think about the scale of this, and he said that no fuel actually hit ground, 3 gallons in total spilled, with tens of thousands, of course, defueled already, and then handing that over to Admiral Barnett, who will be responsible for the closure itself. When they talk about what's going to actually happen to the facility, it's not yet clear, but the plan from the Navy's perspective is closure in place, and that means basically doing a power wash, if you will, of the facility, and then locking it up for good.
And we also heard from him about the community input that they are getting to see what the community would maybe want with this facility. There have been a lot of talks and discussions and suggestions about what Red Hill could become, but ultimately you heard today from these top leaders the Navy's commitment and the military's commitment really to not use this as any sort of fuel storage moving forward, and that they remain committed to that that goal of doing this safely and also making sure that this shutdown is really going to be a shutdown and does not become a future site for a fuel storage.
Right, and still a lot of work ahead. They talked about the residual fuel. They're estimating about 64,000 gallons of what they call residual fuel that they have to then extract from those pipes and from the facility. There will be 4,000 gallons at the end of that process that will still be left over that they actually have to manually go in there and take out as they disassemble those pipes. And then next week, we want to move real quick and let you know we're talking about rail.
Yeah, we're going to be talking to Colleen Hanabusa as well as Laurie Kahikina and getting an update on what's happening with rail. We want to thank you for tuning in to Spotlight Now. We leave you with a rainy but beautiful shot of Coconut Island over there in Hilo. Thanks for watching. We'll see you right back here next week, Tuesday.